Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Vibrant Health Show. Let me get everything all set up. All right. Had lots of good response for this topic. I think people kind of know that inflammation is a problem. And now we're going to talk about it. So today we're going to talk about Inflamm-AGING, right? This is like a new term that has become very popular, but I actually love it. But when you look at what the definition of Inflamm-AGING is, it's accelerated aging, right? So like raise of hands, who wants accelerated aging? Nobody, right? But inflammation's at the root of that. And there's so many things that are in our control to slow it down, to make better choices, to really decrease the amount of inflammation, which has a direct effect on how quickly or how gracefully we age, right? We're all going to age, but to do it more gracefully than accelerated, that's the goal, right? That's what we want. And that doesn't just mean externally, it means internally, right? How can we reduce our risk of a lot of these really chronic inflammatory diseases, neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and dementia, autoimmune disease like lupus and MS? All of these have these inflammatory components, and they're becoming rampant in our society because we're not handling inflammation early on, and they're contributing to all of these really, life-altering and sometimes fatal diseases when we do have control over inflammation. So we're going to dive deep. There's so much to talk about when it comes to inflammation. So today is like your intro course. I'll give you lots of different tips. Feel free to ask questions as we go. I'll try and get back to as many of them as I can. But inflammation is such an important topic because there is truly not a single disease, illness, chronic syndrome that doesn't have some type of inflammation at the root, right? Whether it's the only cause or not, there is always either an inflammatory cause or an inflammatory reaction to almost every single thing out there, including hormone imbalance, chronic fatigue, anxiety and depression, all of these things that are so common. Inflammation plays a part in all of those. So this is a really, really important thing to take seriously. Learn as much as you can about inflammation and then take the action steps needed to start reducing inflammation so that you can protect yourself, right? And that you have control over that. So let's talk a little bit about inflammation first. Inflammation is a good thing, right? For the most part, in the design of the human body, we need inflammation to help us recover from wounds. We need inflammation to help us fight off infections. We need inflammation to happen when we're in danger. That acute, right, short-term inflammatory response is normal, it's good, it's supposed to happen, and we need it. So the goal is not to shut down our inflammation response completely, which unfortunately a lot of like the medical treatments for inflammation are really just squashing our inflammatory response. So not only will it turn off the chronic inflammation, but now you're also not getting the acute inflammation, which puts you more at risk, right, for infections, for other conditions. So we want to find that nice happy medium where we're allowing the short-term acute response when we need it, but we're shutting down that chronic underlying long-term inflammation is really the one that makes the most damage. Our spirulina does magical things. Great, love that. Spirulina is a great tool. Okay, so we want inflammation, but we don't want long-term chronic inflammation. That's what leads to that accelerated aging, and nobody wants that. That's what leads to the chronic disease, the chronic illness, and nobody wants that. So here are some signs and symptoms. I want you to go through these with me and make like a checklist of how many of these symptoms you have on a daily basis. So these are the most common symptoms I see that could be an indication or a hint that you might have chronic underlying inflammation. So number one is trouble losing weight. If you feel like I try, right? I do the things everyone says to do. I'm trying to eat healthier. I'm moving my body. I'm doing all these things, and I really don't see the scale move. That could be a sign that we have internal inflammation. It makes it very hard for the body to burn fat when there's chronic inflammation. So trouble losing weight, inability to lose weight, that's a huge sign that we have some underlying inflammation. So if that's you, remember we're keeping count, right? How many of these do I have? If that's you, you're gonna put up one finger. We have one of these already. Number 2, joint pain and stiffness. If you're waking up in the morning and feeling really creaky for no reason, right? You didn't run a marathon yesterday, you didn't do anything major, but you're waking up and maybe there's stiffness in your joints, your hands, your knees, you're starting to get this more prolonged stiffness or it's happening more often, that's a sign of inflammation. In fact, osteoarthritis, even rheumatoid arthritis, those are all inflammatory conditions, right? Inflammation causes those things in the first place. So the start of getting that achiness and that stiffness is a sign of chronic inflammation. So if you have that, right, we're putting up another finger. Number 3, I hear this so much, is like, I just feel puffy, right? Like maybe your face is puffy or your eyes are puffy, or you always feel like you have like this layer on top of you of just feeling puffy. That's inflammation, right? That sits on your body and it creates that puffy look or that puffy feeling. So if you often find yourself waking up feeling puffy or looking puffy, that's number 3, right? We're making our counts. Number 4, pain in your stomach or bloating, right? Inflammation in the gut, and we're going to talk more about gut here in just a second. Inflammation in the gut is a huge source of chronic inflammation, because the reality is most people who don't actively take care of their gut microbiome have leaky gut, and leaky gut creates massive systemic inflammation. And a good initial sign if you have inflammation in the gut is, do you feel bloated? Do you have discomfort in your abdomen or in your gut? That's another sign of chronic inflammation, right? So we're counting. How many do you have so far? Tell me in the comments, what number are you up to? The next one's fatigue. Fatigue is such a general symptom. I feel like it can go along with everything, but fatigue typically more after you eat is what I want you thinking about when it comes to inflammation. So we're also going to talk about how blood sugar regulation impacts inflammation. And if you are somebody who feels more tired after eating, right? Food's supposed to give us fuel. It's supposed to give us energy. But when we have blood sugar dysregulation or we have inflammation, a lot of times we can actually feel more tired after eating. So if you've been noticing that, like I eat, I don't feel great for a while, that's a good sign that there's probably some chronic inflammation going on. Headaches, that's a big one. Headaches of any kind, but especially if you get more headaches after eating, if you get headaches throughout the day, if you get them more than maybe one headache every couple of months because you were stressed, right? That's different. But if you're getting them more frequently, we know that there's some neurologic inflammation happening that's really contributing to getting headaches more often than just, every once in a blue moon. Or if there's a reason, right? Like I had a stressful day, I was on the screen too much today, my head hurts. But headaches that don't really seem to have a specific cause that you can link it to has an inflammatory component to it. Burning eyes, this is a big one for me especially. I can always feel when my body's inflamed by my eyes. They'll get puffy, they'll get burny, they'll get more red. Maybe you notice your eyes don't look as bright and as healthy as they normally do. That's one of the first things I can notice when I know my inflammation's building is my eyes just don't look good. You ever feel like that? Like you look in the mirror and you're like, I just don't look healthy. Like something's not right here. That's one of the first signs of inflammation, right? We're draining all of those good nutrients and all of that great, anti-inflammatory properties that make us look bright and healthy. So even just like your own complexion, the way you see yourself in the mirror can give you a big indication how much inflammation is going on. And then lastly, any type of swelling in like your ankles, your legs, your joints, especially if it happens throughout the day. So or first thing when you wake up, right? If you're getting consistent swelling or we have inflammation that's really kind of pooling in different areas, that's a very obvious sign, right? And that's not one that most people have early on. If that's happening, it means we have quite a bit of inflammation that now it's actually settling in these different body parts. So typically that's a sign that it's not mild anymore. We have a pretty big inflammatory load if you're actually seeing the swelling, right? If you take your socks off and there's indents, if your rings get tighter as the day goes on, anything that you can truly see that swelling, that inflammation, that's like a surefire 100% sign, right? That we have an inflammatory issue. So of all of those, how many did you have? Tell me in the comments. I'm curious to know. And then if you didn't have any, great, fantastic. You have low inflammation. All of them. Yeah. I feel like that's a lot of people, unfortunately, because the world we live in fosters inflammation, right? So that's the next thing we're going to talk about. Where is this inflammation coming from? Because I think most people are pretty aware that they have it, but where do I go from there, right? Where does it come from? Where should I focus my attention on? So there's a couple of very typical places that majority of our chronic inflammation is going to come from. Number one, I lost count. Yeah, four to five. I would say if you have more than two on that list, we have some inflammation issues, definitely. Okay, number one is no surprise to anyone, but majority of our inflammation is likely coming from our nutrition, right? Most people don't eat a well-balanced diet. Even if you try to do good, right? Like I'm avoiding some of the really bad stuff. I don't eat fast food. The inflammation is coming from the sourcing. The inflammation can come from not getting the right ratios of, are you getting enough vegetables and protein? Are you getting a variety of nutrition? There's so many like intricate details when it comes to getting a well-balanced diet and nutrition plan. And it's a little bit different for everyone too, right? Like the basic foundation is very similar. We want to get enough protein. We want to get enough carbohydrates. We want to get enough fats. We want clean sources. We want to keep sugars low. There's some of those general recommendations, but then person specific, right? What things are you more deficient in? Are you really lacking in protein and you need more amino acids? There's so much that could go into that decision, but I don't want that to stagnate your progress. What I find often when I talk with people is like, I know I need to make these changes, but there's so much information out there. Should I be doing keto? Should I be doing paleo? Should I be doing AIP? Do I have to do an elimination diet? And there's so much that you tend to do nothing, or you tend to not really commit to something because you're not sure exactly which one's perfect for you. I want to take that stress off of you for a second. Something is better than nothing. Start making changes in the right direction. One of the things I have coming up, it's really important to me to provide resources for people to be able to implement the things that we talk about, right? I feel like there's so much information out there, but not a whole lot of implementation tools. So if you haven't been following me for very long, quarterly, I do a free health challenge that allows us to take all the things I talk about and really put it into action. So especially when it comes to nutrition, just to get to see, okay, awesome, this is what an anti-inflammatory diet looks like. This is how much food I should be eating. This is the timing of my food I should be eating. Just being able to see that in real time and use it over the course of several weeks is really going to help you put the things we're talking about into action. And my next one starts on Monday. So if you are looking for more help with nutrition, you want to know what an anti-inflammatory nutrition plan looks like, sign up. It's called my Spring Clean 21-day challenge. It's completely free, and it's just taking these lifestyle pieces: nutrition, exercise. We're going to do some mindset, right? Stress management. We'll talk about that in a second. Some very light movement, just put into 21 days of actionable checklists. You'll have videos, you'll have meal plans, you'll have grocery shopping lists. So if you're overwhelmed by the food piece of it, I don't have enough time to go into all the food details today, but the challenge will, and you'll get a really comprehensive list of what you should be doing nutritionally. So everyone knows our food is important, but if you're overwhelmed or unsure of where to start because of all the options, I think the 21-day challenge is the perfect starting place. It's not overly complicated. It's really just a good foundational place to start to move in the right direction. So food-wise, we know that's important. If you need extra help, sign up for the challenge, and that will give you the deep dive into nutrition. But that's where most people's stuff is coming from, right? Food. Number two is your gut, right? The gut microbiome has so many functions, really great ones when it's working properly, but can also be the source of massive inflammation when it's not, right? So we talk about this leaky gut term. If you're not familiar with what that means, leaky gut is when there's inflammation in the gut lining. It's truly an inflammatory condition that can be caused from bacteria. It can be caused by viruses. It can be caused by yeast. It can be caused by toxins. Like there's lots of different reasons the inflammation happens in your gut. But when it does, your gut lining, so what it's supposed to look like is all the junctions in your gut are supposed to be nice and tight. That way the things that you eat, that stuff that's in your digestive system goes all the way through and comes out the other end and does not get into your bloodstream. That's the goal. But when we have inflammation, it starts to get puffier, right? Just like your hands get puffy, just like your eyes get puffy, your gut gets puffy. And then when those junctions open up, Well, now the bacteria, the inflammatory molecules, the toxins, the pesticides, all the stuff that was never supposed to get in your bloodstream is leaking through, right? Hence the term leaky gut. It's leaking through those junctions, and now it gets in your bloodstream. So instead of staying contained to your gut, now we have widespread inflammation. Once it's in your bloodstream, it's going everywhere, which is why it can affect your thyroid, your adrenal glands, your hormones, your immune system, because it goes into all of those areas. So leaky gut truly is a huge deal. And I think because it's been talked about so much, people have kind of like stopped thinking it's such a big deal, but it is the root of a lot of this inflammation. So if you have not actively taken care of your gut, made sure you're getting your microbiome well functioning and cleaned out, it is contributing to that inflammation. So gut and food are most likely the two biggest sources of your inflammation in general. And then there's some other ones, right? But I always say, like, start where you can. Those are the first two places I highly recommend you start with, right? They're going to move you massively in the right direction if you start focusing on nutrition and you start focusing on gut health. If you've maybe done both of those already and you're like, I still feel like I have inflammation, great. Start moving on to the next ones, right? Number 3, stress. I talk about stress so much, truly ad nauseum. Like, I feel like I talk about stress more than just about anything else, but it's because it impacts every function just as much as diet does, because our stress hormones, when they are going off all the time, are incredibly inflammatory. But not only that, our stress hormones will shut down your body's ability to manage inflammation, right? That's a big deal. So not only is it causing inflammation, but it's also not allowing you to process out the inflammation. So it just continues to circulate. So stress is not just about mood. It's not just about depression and anxiety. It's not just about being irritable. It truly has everything to do with your inflammation, your immune function. So getting really good at being able to manage your stress, because the reality is the stress doesn't go away, right? Like, we all have it. It's there. It keeps coming up, some more than others. So it's not that we need to live a stress-free life. We need to be really good at managing that stress. You will notice whenever I do my free challenges, there is always, I never release a challenge that doesn't have a stress management component to it, because it's that important. So in the spring challenge, I have 3 different mindfulness techniques that I teach you how to use that calm your nervous system, that allow you to process stress so it doesn't become this big physical burden on your body, and just different things that you can do, visualizations and meditations and breath techniques to be able to calm that stress response. Because stress is also, just as much as inflammation, I believe, the two of them are equal in the disease process. And when you have both of them, when you have inflammation and high stress levels that you don't manage well, that is like the perfect storm to end up with autoimmune disease, inflammation, chronic illness, infections that don't resolve. Inflammation and poor stress management are the root cause. Everyone talks about root cause. Those are the main root causes of most of these issues. And they allow those other problems to continue to just manifest in the body. So if you know you don't deal with stress well, right? If you know you have a lot of stress going on, if you know you've let your self-care fall to the side, I highly recommend you register for my completely free 21-day challenge and start implementing the stress management tools. And I think you'll be surprised to notice how much you even feel your inflammation reduce when you get a handle on that stress. It's so important. So stress not only causes inflammation, but it also just perpetuates that whole cycle. So making sure we're keeping that at the forefront when we're thinking about how to reduce inflammation. Next up is chronic infections in general. So we talked about gut, right? We know gut and leaky gut causes inflammation. We know nutrition causes inflammation. We know stress causes inflammation. But a lot of people who have chronic inflammation, ongoing inflammation, I'll find infections at the root. Viral infections are one of the biggest ones, right? Things like chronic Epstein-Barr virus, chronic herpes viruses, CMV is another one I find a lot. But those chronic underlying viral loads put a ton of inflammation in the body. So making sure you're managing those properly, that you're really reducing your viral load and supporting your immune system, because that inflammation, again, gets in cells, gets in your bloodstream, gets to all these different places, which is why a chronic viral load is also highly linked to autoimmune disease, because it impacts all of those areas. So if you have chronic infections, if you have chronic viral load, we know that's inflammatory. Just making sure that you are doing what you can for that. She said, I love your earrings. Thank you. These ones are my favorites. Next up, I don't want to overwhelm you, so I'm just going to do one more. Adipose tissue and weight. Now, I don't want this to be a vicious cycle because I already said one of the symptoms of inflammation is that it's hard to lose weight. And then I'm telling you being overweight is causing inflammation. And then you're stressed because you're like, I know I'm overweight, but I can't freaking lose the weight. So what do I do, right? I don't want to get in that situation with you, but it does need to be said that increased adipose tissue, especially visceral fat, this is what I really want you thinking about. If you hold a lot of that around the midsection, if it's hard, like if you touch your stomach and it's hard, that's more visceral fat. That's the more dangerous fat, the more inflammatory fat. That is a time that we need to get really serious about making as many of those lifestyle changes as we can, really balancing the gut, because weight loss is, I mean, we all know it, right? Being overweight puts you more at risk for all of these different conditions, cancers, diabetes, all kinds of stuff. Being at an ideal healthy weight, that doesn't mean you have to be super skinny. A healthy ideal weight is going to protect you from massive amounts of inflammation. Again, there's so many tools you can implement right away, so don't stress about it. But doing the 21-day challenge, I know I keep mentioning it, but it's giving you all the tools we're talking about, will be a great first start to help have a little bit of a weight loss focus, right? Now, if you don't want to lose weight, you'll still be perfectly fine doing the challenge, but it is designed to help people lose some unhealthy amount of adipose tissue because we know ultimately that makes people healthier. So having a good, healthy weight, good, healthy, just visceral fat in general will also reduce that inflammation. So those are the top areas. There's plenty more. There's toxins, there's all kinds of stuff. But just to start with a good, simple list of the most common places your inflammation are coming, I want you to start thinking of those: your gut, your food, your stress, your adipose tissue, and if there's any chronic infections. Those are the main places I start. And then you can always go down further past after that to see what else is going on. But that's a great starting place if you haven't looked at those yet. Lastly, for today, what I want to do is if you have recent blood work, even just general blood work from your doctor, I'm going to take you through some of the things that you might have on those basic labs that have never been, maybe your doctor's never been spoken to about these, that could give you signs that you have inflammation. Now, there's lots of really detailed, deeper testing. If you've been following me, I love functional testing. There's lots of extra testing you can do. But there's a lot of information that you probably have on your basic CMP, CBC labs you get from your doctor that potentially they haven't addressed with you. So I'm going to go through some of these more, common labs and the numbers you want to be looking for. So if you have labs, pull them up or save this or write them down so that you can go back and look at your own labs, because I'm also going to mention like functional ranges, right? Just because it's not out of range does not necessarily mean there's no inflammation. So we're going to go through those together. So this is a good interactive thing that you can do right away. Most people will have these labs, or at least, a good chunk of them. So you can see if there are warning signs for that inflammation. Lab number 1 is your vitamin D levels. I talk about vitamin D so much. Quick question, can EBV raise calprotectin? Absolutely. Anytime I see calprotectin elevated, I'm thinking, what's the trigger, right? Usually an immune trigger. Bacteria, fungus, Epstein-Barr are big things for calprotectin, which is an inflammatory marker you'll find on a stool sample. But yes, infections raise calprotectin, definitely. All right, for vitamin D, if you have your vitamin D levels, and most people have had them checked, you probably have these checked. Not only, you'll notice the range starts at 30. To me, if your vitamin D is a 30, you're going to be flagged within range. That is not near adequate. At bare minimum, you want your vitamin D level to be 50 or above. Personally, I want it 60 or above. But most of the functional research is saying at least 50 to protect yourself from inflammation. So if yours is 35, if yours is 40, no, you're not necessarily deficient, but you certainly are not sufficient, right? You're not getting those beautiful anti-inflammatory properties. So checking your vitamin D level, making sure that we're 50 or above, 60 or above is ideal. You don't want vitamin D toxicity. You don't need to be over 100. So really between 60 and 80 is kind of the happy place for vitamin D levels. So check your labs. Are you there? If you're not there, that's a super easy place to start. Start supplementing with a high quality vitamin D. I always like it to have both K1 and K2. I'll come back and drop links to my favorite vitamin D that has all of the right components in it, but that's an easy place to start, right? If your vitamin D is low, getting it up is going to reduce your inflammation. That's number one. Number two, CRP, C-reactive protein, is a huge marker for inflammation. And I'm noticing a lot more people, doctors in general, are testing it now. So the likelihood is you've probably had it tested on one of your labs before. So CRP, C-reactive protein, is a biomarker for inflammation in the cardiovascular system, as well as the liver and the immune system. So elevated CRP is a really good indication that there is systemic inflammation in the body. Now, most people will want CRP under 3. If it's less than 3, you'll be flagged in normal range. But ideally, we want that under 1. So if your CRP is over 1, there is some low-grade inflammation. If it's over 3, that's pretty massive inflammation. And if it's over 3, I'm always thinking we have some type of a trigger, right? That's usually an infection. There's an inflammatory process going on, but we really don't want it over 1. So look back and maybe you were flagged, but if you're a 2, if you're a 2.5, that is still a level that you're going to want to be thinking about inflammation. So CRP is a very great predictive marker for internal inflammation. The next one is ferritin. Sorry, I've been talking a lot already today. All right, ferritin is your iron storage. With ferritin, it can be problematic if it's low or if it's high. Your vitamin D was 16. Oh yeah, girl, we got triple that, quadruple that really quick. 16 is not acceptable. A really good high quality vitamin D, ASAP. Ferritin is your iron storage. Now, when ferritin is low, we're drained, right? And when we don't have enough energy, we can't process inflammation. So low ferritin, you're going to get more things like fatigue. You're going to get maybe sick more often. You're going to get like dark circles under your eyes, headaches. Ferritin, when it's low, is really contributing to those things, which are inflammatory. However, ferritin, when it's high, too much iron storage, too much iron in general, is an inflammatory issue. That means your body's not processing it properly through the liver, and it's building up in the body. So whether your ferritin is low or high, both mean inflammation. Now, low for me, if you have your ferritin tested, which again, I believe most people on almost all your labs, they usually test ferritin now. If your ferritin is under 40, the range will tell you 15. Under 15 is like crazy deficient. I don't want it under 40 or over 120. Right? And the range will go from 15 to 150. So you might have been flagged in normal range, but were you in functional range, right? We really want to make sure we have enough, but we don't have too much. 40 to about 120 would be the ideal place to be when it comes to ferritin. The next one is your glucose, in particular, your A1C. Again, most of you at your doctor's visits get your A1C tested. And as long as, as long as you're not in the pre-diabetes, right, they're going to say you're fine. However, when it comes to inflammation and most importantly, brain function, the cutoff is really 5.2. The research is showing over 5.2, which is not pre-diabetic yet, but that's the time that we start seeing changes in the brain. And that's a big deal. That's why diabetes is linked to Alzheimer's and dementia. But 5.2 is really the number, not the 5.5, 5.6, when we start getting into those ranges of prediabetes. 5.2 and under is really what we're looking for A1C. The next one is your ALT, AST. These are your liver enzymes. They're on every CMP. Everyone's probably had these tested at least once a year. With ALT and AST, it's looking at how well your liver is functioning. When those are elevated, we know that we just have a burden on the body. Your liver is doing a lot of work. Now, when they're significantly elevated, we could be thinking that there's potentially, liver damage and that going on. But even slight elevations in AST and ALT tell me immediately that the liver is overburdened, it's trying to work through something, and it's creating inflammation. Ideally, right, the cutoffs for both will go up to about 35 or 40, depending on the range. Ideally, I never like either of those long-term to be over 25. even a little bit less than that if possible. Once we start getting to the higher end of that range, maybe there's not dysfunction, but there's not proper function, right? We know that there's a burden on the liver. So you always want to be a good 10 points under where that high normal is for AST and ALT to know that your body's really doing a good job of processing through the liver in particular. And then homocysteine, this might not be one that you've had tested. I think it's getting a little bit more popular, but it is one of my favorite markers. If I had to choose 2 markers to look at for inflammation and I could only choose 2, homocysteine and CRP would be top of my list, because CRP looks at really inflammation, immune system, where homocysteine looks at methylation capacity, a lot of MTHFR and genetic SNPs, but homocysteine is your body's ability to self-detox, to make sure it's kind of clearing out the system. And when that becomes elevated, we know we're allowing too much toxic burden and inflammation to build up in the body. Just like all the other ranges, most labs will give homocysteine up to about a 15. I've seen some labs call normal up to like 17.5. When it comes to homocysteine, 10 or below, that's the goal. I really don't even like it creeping up towards that 12 mark. We know that we're building toxicity in the body. So we want to keep that under 10. 10 or above would mean that there's some toxic load. So if you've not had that one tested, that's one I would highly suggest asking for on your next blood lab. It's super easy to throw on your basic blood panels, but it gives you a lot of information about what's going on with your methylation and your detox pathways. Really valuable marker. You guys follow me? I feel like I'm giving you a lot. Hopefully you're taking notes and you're gonna go back and look at your stuff. The last one is your size and shape of your red blood cells. I'll leave you here. I had a couple more I was gonna go over, but I feel like I've bombarded you with information. So again, just on your regular CBC, which I know all of you have had tested, I guarantee you have like an annual CBC. The size and shape of your red blood cells can also give you indication of inflammation. If they are starting to get too large, and this would all be at the very top of your CBC, there's your RDW, that's the size, like looking at the width of the red blood cells, there's your total red blood cells. If those are becoming elevated, we know there's inflammation in those cells, right? And typically that's also maybe some iron overload, which can also cause inflammation. So if any of those red blood cell markers are elevated, those are also markers of inflammation. So just to recap all the things we went over, we're first looking for vitamin D. We want it at minimum over 50, 60 to 80 is ideal. We're going to check and see if we've tested CRP. With C-reactive protein, you want, ideally, it's under 1. Anything over 1, we are building some low-grade inflammation in the body. Anything over 3 is pretty massive inflammation in the body. So low CRP. Ferritin, which is our iron storage, we ideally want it between 40 and 120, even though the range is much broader than that. An ideal function, we don't want it too low and we don't want it too high. Your A1C, which is looking at some glucose markers, we want it 5.2 or below, ideally, right? So just because you're not pre-diabetic does not mean that there's not inflammation. We want that lower. Homocysteine, which is a fantastic marker for self-detoxification, body's ability to handle toxic burden and methylation. We want that under 10. We want our ALT and AST, which are liver enzymes, at least 10 points below the top range of normal, ideally under about 20. You want a nice mid-range for those values. And then making sure the size and shape of your red blood cells, your RDW, your RBCs are all within normal range, because any of those being out of functional range, even if you were in range, right, on the labs, can mean that there's low-grade inflammation. And the sooner we catch it and deal with it when it's low-grade, the easier it is to fix them when we wait for these massive inflammatory shifts. So hopefully that gives you some real life things that you can implement right away. Go and look at your labs, go and see what's going on. And then don't forget, the best step is lifestyle first. My 21-day challenge starts on Monday. It's a spring clean challenge. It is specifically focused around 21 days of anti-inflammatory food plans. I have 21 days of stress management tools to share with you. We're doing light movement and toning specifically to help with like core stability and toning those problem areas. And we're going to be talking a lot about inflammation, about how to reduce inflammation. So all of that, you're getting 21 days of meal plans and recipes, simple workouts, stress management tools, all the tips that I love to use. The challenge is free. You're spending 21 days with me, just getting healthy, getting ready for the summer. Highly encourage you to register, whether you just use parts and pieces or not. Although I fully want you to commit to it for the 21 days and see what amazing transformation you can have with your inflammation in even that short of amount of time. When you do the right things consistently for 21 days, you're going to feel changes in your body. So I have links. I'll drop the links below to register for the challenge. We start as a group on Monday. I want all of you to be there. I want all of you to show up ready to work and get some really cool changes in your body and see your inflammation reduce over the next 3 weeks. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. Thank you, thank you. I see lots of thank yous. I appreciate you guys. If you have questions, where do we register? The link is in my bio. I also have a couple of reels that have the registration on there, and I'm gonna come back and post that link. So I'll make it really easy to find the registration link all over the place. I'm just gonna look real quick at a couple of questions I didn't get to. EBV VCA is 2.7. I would need to know the other markers. Just the EBV VCA doesn't tell us a whole lot. That's past infection, but we need early antigen, we need nuclear antigen. There's a lot that goes into chronic Epstein-Barr. Oh, the nuclear was 8 and vitamin D is 20. Yeah, if both your nuclear and VCA, I'd be curious about your early antigen, but vitamin D at 20 with the chronic Epstein-Barr is way, way, way too low. We need to triple that quickly. Hi. Excellent. All right. Well, if I miss any other questions, I'll come back and get them. Appreciate you guys being here. Hope you have a great end of your day, and I'll see you next week.